I, Philip Joseph here.
I would like to be judged as being the Prime Minister, not being judged as being part of a government.
We came into government that we had a manifesto and a vision and mission that had been approved by my party, by the highest body.
Basel 11 has not been in existence. 50 was...
Giant getting bazooka. Spraying big on to knock out mosquitoes.
I have never had a joint account with anybody in my life. Not my ex-wife, not my children, nobody. And I will refer that to the privileges committee.
What about the culture of people getting into office and not being effective?
What people become Prime Minister solution? I've been the most ready.
Let's do it this Wednesday, because if it's Wednesday, it's NewsMaker Live. Good evening, welcome to another edition of NewsMaker Live right here on DBS Television. We apologize for the late start of the broadcast. As usual, I have a special program in store for you between now and 10 o'clock this evening, at which time we'll be concluding with the clip that peaked. My guest this evening is former St. Lucia Prime Minister and a political leader of the opposition United Workers' Party, as well as the leader of the parliamentary opposition. His appearance this evening coincides with some controversy pertaining to two projects, and that is CIP and the GPH project, taking over the island's ports via a lease arrangement in the first instance for 3 decades, and subsequently the lease can be renewed by some 10 years. And there's been some issues that is worthy of discussion on our broadcast this evening. We'll be taking your calls later, so welcome Mr. Former Prime Minister and Leader of the Opposition, Alan Chastanet.
Great to be here with you.
Why do you think there's normally so much controversy surrounding major projects on the island? If it's not DSH, now it's GPH, and then we have various concerns being addressed regarding or raised regarding the CIP. Why do you think there's so much controversy surrounding those things?
Well, there's a lot of moving parts.
Mm-hmm.
And if a government is not transparent, if a government is not being very clear and making sure that people are not speculating, then it's going to make it even more controversial. So information is very, very important when one is undertaking these types of projects.
And it seems that governments are not learning, because you would have gone through your own experience with DSH. Why do you think, particularly in your case, there didn't appear to be much public consultation and revelation surrounding the project?
I think that maybe we were making too much information available too quickly. So in many ways we were ahead of ourselves. So a lot of the initial drawings that came out were things that DSH was considering but had not been properly ventilated, but we wanted to be transparent. I was transparent from day one. When I first met Mr. Otea King, pictures were taken. When we did the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding, the MOU, that was done in front of everyone else and explained. And then the next thing that we had was an agreement which basically said in principle we approved to the concept of what DSH was going to do, but it was subject to a final negotiation. So it would be very similar if you were going to build a house, Tim, and you went to planning. So you said, okay, this land right now is zoned agricultural, and I want to put a residential complex on it, and this is what it's going to look like basically. What DCA can give you is an approval in principle. Say, we're not going to have any difficulties in making this thing happen. But you don't submit the plans at that point. So it just tells you you're not wasting time, because if they would tell you no from the onset, you wouldn't go in that direction. But this is difficult information, and I think that this is in a large part where the media and civil society play a very important part. When it's left to the two political parties to go back and forth with each other, persons are always going to put it in a perspective sometimes that favors their opinion.
But to a large extent, a lot of information would have been leaked with regard to DSH, as opposed to you making that information public.
So the only piece of information that they claim that they leaked was the agreement that we had, an agreement in principle. That agreement was drafted and had a confidentiality part to it. So there was nothing to put out in the public domain as yet, because these are things that we agreed to in principle, but had to be worked on and be very specific. So it's not until we actually signed the horse racing track, we made that public. The Alpina Hotel, we made that public. We were working on the cruise ship port, okay, and we were very public with all of those things. But they had a much larger program in play, and I don't think it was appropriate to have made that document public at that point. But I think that for the exact same reason you've just brought up, I think that that's something that we're going to have to rethink on moving forward.
But why should any project be shrouded in secrecy when it has the possibility of, in one way or the other, positively or negatively, impacting the people of a country? Do you think that is, in your experience, as the demand that's normally made by developers?
So let's take a big project, Disney World, when they were going into Orlando, right? That would have been kept very secret, because if in fact that people knew that that development was coming, it would have caused land in that area to go up significantly, and it would have hampered the project. So there has to be a period of time where there is some level of secrecy, but certainly once they're getting their approvals and certificates are being handed out, I don't think there should be any secrecy past that point. But certainly the terms leading up to an agreement, I understand why certain companies would want it. If I'm a hotelier, if I'm in manufacturing, and I want to do something that is going to be earth-shattering in the market, and I want to keep it a secret that I'm doing so, and the country is going to benefit from it, I think there has to be some level of trust. But certainly once the terms of the agreement are finalized, that should be made public.
You say you made reference to the word trust there, but people generally are very suspicious when it comes to arrangements and deals involving politicians and developers. Why do you think that there's this level of distrust?
I'm not sure that that's 100% true. I think that there are some people that are much better at it. You know, you've pointed it out several times. There were several groups, the concerned citizens of Vieux-Fort, as an example. Was it real? Was it a group that genuinely was concerned about the interest of Vieux-Fort? Or was it a group that came together that was politically motivated with the intention of trying to disrupt and slow down a project because they feared it politically? Now, I would have to say that your allegations and other people's allegations that they were a political group is true. Because the opposite is happening now in Vieux-Fort. Vieux-Fort's become a ghost town. Vieux-Fort is being starved of any significant investment. And we're seeing things regress. We're seeing that it's being branded as a crime center. So where are the concerned citizens? St. Jude's is not open. 3 years. 3 years. And this is a government that said that we should have continued the old building. They could have finished the old building in 3 months with some chemical and some paint. So that was a categorical lie. You want to now go and convince the people of St. Lucia moving into an old building, right? Versus continuing a brand new purpose-built building, purposely built to be a hospital. I mean, when I went to OKEU the other day, I ended up taking some pictures of the ceiling, because exactly the same system that was being done at St. Jude's is what was done there. All of the utility wires, everything are in the ceiling. That's why you have the high ceilings. So when you walk into that building, it was designed to be a hospital. And very importantly, it was designed that as the technology in the hospital changed, you could easily change the layout of the building. We're talking about maximum 6 months and $50 million to have finished the ground floor. Now we have a government that's talking about spending $265 million, and God knows when it's going to be done.
But back on GPH, you initially had any discussions with that entity to have some arrangement whereby it would have been involved in the development of Port Castries or the Soufrière Port or Vieux-Fort?
Yeah, we met GPH very early. In fact, I traveled with GPH. Mehmet is a very good business person. We got to go and see their operations in Venice. We saw their operations in Lisbon. We saw their operations in one other location, I can't remember, but we went to 3 different locations. Oh, in Malta. I was very, very impressed with what they were proposing to do. We never signed a deal because we never could come to a deal that we thought was a good enough deal.
What was GPH offering to the government at the time?
They wanted to take over the loan from Slasa, which was about $20 million. They wanted to get the entire $6.50. And they wanted all of the increases up to $12 to go to them, and that we would then share on any money past the $12. They offered about $20 million up front to go into projects that we deemed developmentable in the Castries area. So we could have used it for the market. We could have used it for a number of projects in the Castries city. The point of departure, where that was really a sticking point for us, the money was, because I thought that was way too much money to give them for what we were getting in return. But the big point of departure was Vieux Fort. We felt very strongly that we wanted to do a port in Vieux Fort. We did not want to expand Port Castries. We didn't think that we should build Port Castries to handle what's called the Oasis class, a 6,000 berth ship, passenger ship. So we felt that should have gone into Vieux Fort, and Vieux Fort should have been focusing on home porting. They didn't want to do that because that would have meant that they would have had to spend another $50-60 million, and they felt that would be too long of a return. So we ended up, as you know, going into an agreement with Royal Caribbean, MSC, and Carnival to develop the home port, and that's the direction that we were going to go in. And I said to them, if they want to continue managing Port Castries, I'm happy to look at that, but this was what the government's the priority was. So we never came to a conclusive agreement. Primarily, one, I was not happy with the compensation. And so when we hear the program today, the government of St. Lucia today gets $6.50. If we're talking about 1 million passengers, that means $6.5 million US a year that the government of St. Lucia would have collected through Slasa.
That's US?
US. They're proposing to send it to $12. So that means it go from $6.5 million to $12 million a year. So my understanding is that GPH will keep $11 and government will get $1. Right? So why would you do that deal? Why wouldn't St. Lucia continue to get the $6.50? And if in fact GPH wants to add another $5.50, which would be $5.5 million a year, you're going to be making an investment of $30 million to fix up Port Castries if you had to do that, right? And that's more than enough money to make that money back. So I think that I'm hoping that the general public, because that's who's being affected. Very difficult sometimes for people to appreciate how they're being affected. They're being affected because almost $440 million US, or $1 billion EC dollars, or 11 million US dollars a year is being taken out of the hands and control of the government of St. Lucia, whether it's through Slasa or directly, and put in the hands of a third party, GPH. And GPH is free to spend that money how they want to spend it.
But the ordinary man would tell you, how would they be impacted directly because if Slasa does not get those resources? So
we've had an agency that has proven to be skillful. Slasa has built and operated HI Airport, has operated George Charles Airport, has built and expanded Point Seraphim, and operated the cruise ship business for how many years? I mean, the first time I remember, St. Lucia was the first country in the world, the first country in the Caribbean that built a purpose-built cruise ship port. Did you know that? It was Point Seraphim.
Yeah.
And I don't even remember in those days there was a big controversy because we were going to charge $1, $1 head tax, and Carnival pulled out for the $1, right? And Sir John was very, very upset. But they made it through that, and eventually they were able to increase the head tax up to the $6.50. I knew in discussions with the cruise industry that they would have agreed to go to $11 or $12 already. I've said that. So GPH hasn't really brought anything new to the table. The question is, why would we take this money when Solution needs it? This is money that could go into expanding port Castries. This is money that could be used to facilitate moving the container port out of Castries. This is money that could be going in to do a numerous amount of infrastructural projects in St. Lucia. But instead, what are we going to do? We're going to give the money to a third party. They can choose who they want. So we see the first thing that they did is they turned around and hired Mr. Arnold, who is the brother of the chairman of Invest St. Lucia. We see that Thaddeus Antoine became their lawyer. So the question becomes, when the construction begins, who's going to get the contracts? Now that falls out of the control of the government of St. Lucia now. That's their call because it's their money. And the question is, why? SLASPA was paying all of its debts. SLASPA was performing its duties. Now persons who are St. Lucians, and we know how they get their jobs at SLASPA is going to be downsized. And remember, this is the same government that wanted to do the same deal at HIA. They were prepared, in the name of not accruing debt, that they were going to pay a third party, another company outside of St. Lucia, $60 per head for 30 years. Whereas the deal that we have with the Taiwanese, we're paying $35 for 20 years. And if in fact the number of arrivals increases and we're able to pay the debt off earlier, we do that. And that was the problem with the other deal. Even if we saw an increase in the number of arrivals, all of that incremental revenue for the 30 years would have gone to the third party. So you're talking about, to spend $200 million, the company was going to earn in excess of $1 billion. How does that make any sense?
But those are just projections, and we all know that those things are very unpredictable, and they're subject to change.
But we've not
as far as the visitor arrivals and so on.
Sure, but we've not taken extreme numbers. In 2019, we had 450,000 tourist arrivals. So you had almost 500,000 people going through the airport. So I'm not even taking that number to 1 million. I'm saying if you take it at 600,000 around, if you're going to average 600,000 arrivals for the next 30 years, I know it's going to be more than 600,000. And that's already at $1 billion. In the cruise ship, in 2019, we had 800,000 arrivals. You saw in the GPH's own projection, they're expecting that in the short term will be at 1 million, and in the midterm, even more than 1 million. I'm only saying it's 1 million passengers. So I think that we're not being ultrally aggressive here and throwing out numbers that don't make sense. The $6.50 times $1 million is $6.5 million a year.
Now, with regard to the head tax, and you're suggesting that out of the 650, the government of St. Lucia should only get $1. That is what is being suggested, and first suggested by the first deputy political leader of the UWP, Mr. Guy Joseph. But so far, we have not heard from the government with regard to the specifics surrounding that arrangement. Where did you get the information from? Can we give credence to what you're suggesting, that out of the 650, St. Lucia will get $1?
I'm giving the government the opportunity to clear the air. I think that they will know themselves the numbers that we're quoting. It comes from a document that they have. Okay, and we have access to that document. So I just wanted to be clear. I'd rather that they come out and either deny or confirm what those numbers are.
Why do you think that the Prime Minister has a great difficulty in making that disclosure, sharing that information, not with the opposition, but with the St. Lucian public?
That's a great question. Is it that he's embarrassed by the deal and it's difficult for him to justify giving that deal? Because I don't even know how I would begin to justify that deal to the public of St. Lucia. You have a port that's been existing for 3 decades. We've been running it, we're not in debt. That I'm going to now give away all of the revenue and potential revenue for the next 40 years. All I'm going to get is $1 million a year in return. What is it that we're getting? He hasn't even been able to explain what we're getting. And who's it benefiting? And I think that that's the question. The two questions I'm constantly asking myself about several projects that I see the government doing. I see them doing the halls of justice. I see the GPH deal. I saw the Bonanza deal. I saw the CIP, what's going on with there. I've watched the NLA deal, the $80 million. And I've asked myself, why are they doing this? And when I get confused as to the why, okay, I ask the next question, who's benefiting? Because if there's no logical reason to do this, to show that there's a direct benefit to the state, to the people of this country, so you can't say why, you have to be suspicious as to why, then the next question you must ask, well, maybe somebody else is benefiting. So we're seeing a pattern of behavior where this government seems to be going out of its way to take state resources, state money, tax money, etc., potential earnings, and putting those monies in the hands of a third party and bypassing the government's procurement guidelines and bypassing the consolidated account. So you have to ask yourself, why? So right here at home, NLA, you have a Minister of Sports who is also the district representative for Grosley. Correct? $80 million goes into the guarantee goes in, and NLA is using its funds, monies that should be going towards youth development, sports, etc., scholarships. Right? You're now going to take that money and spend it on sporting facilities, the construction of sporting facilities, of which NLA doesn't do. They're not involved in construction, they're involved in running the national lottery. What did my government do? My government used Taiwanese monies, grant money, to build those sporting facilities. This government now is claiming they're using this. So the board has made the decision as to who is going to get the contracts. It just so happens a person who the minister said in an interview, he knows the person, but he can't remember the person's company. Well, when we've done the research, we know that there's a very close relationship between the minister and that individual. That individual is not a contractor, yet that individual has gotten the contract to do the Darren Sammy Stadium and gotten the contract to do Grosley Stadium, and also he's gotten the contract to do Simples Park. Why not the transparency with the clear possible conflict of interest? No bidding. How much did the project cost? We've asked these questions now for what, 2 months? This is state money. And as I said in the letter that I wrote to CDB and that I wrote to the World Bank and I wrote to the IMF, that this happened on the same day, the exact same day that the government took on a policy-based loan with those institutions, under the assurance that what they were going to do is strengthen the procurement guidelines. And on the same day, those procurement guidelines were bypassed. The halls of justice. Why? Why would you get a third party to do a bolt arrangement, to build a government building, when in the past, the entity that does those bolt arrangements for us is NIC and NIPRO? What makes it even more suspicious is that NIC and NIPRO would give you a 20 to 30 year mortgage. This bolt arrangement is 12 years. So it means that the high cost of building this facility, $61 million US, $162 million, which does not include the financing for the 12 years, is now going to be paid off in 12 years.
Does that give the government breathing space?
What breathing space?
Tight fiscal
No, because if it was in NIC and the bolt arrangement, it's not considered government debt. And meanwhile, the purpose of NIC doing those kinds of projects is to make a return to benefit the pensioners. So if you're prepared to allow this third-party company that did not win a bid, they were selected, to go and do this project for 3-4 times the price of what NIC would have charged you, and not being on your debt is the same. Why?
But you keep raising those issues, and those are widely ventilated, whether it is in Parliament through the loan guarantee on behalf of LNA, but the intelligentsia in St. Lucia, people who, quote-unquote, ought to know better, and based on what you're saying, if there is a problem with what you're suggesting there, shouldn't those people take objection to it? Is it a case where they just don't see eye to eye with you on those various matters that you're highlighting?
There may be some of that, and I certainly would hope that they would come out and defend the government. And say, Mr. Leader of the Opposition, we think that you're wrong. Right? And maybe if I'm seeing it wrong, if I'm reading the evidence in front of us incorrectly, I'm not the one who revealed the halls of justice. We had to read about the halls of justice in the Trinidad Guardian, and the details were provided there. And what made it very suspicious is when we heard that this is a bolt arrangement, but yet NIC and NIPRO were at the groundbreaking. And you hear it's for 12 years. And when you hear these kinds of numbers, Tim, I certainly would like to hear the voices of the civil society and other groups giving their opinion on these issues, because we're not talking about a couple of millions of dollars. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that is going into the hands of third-party persons. I mean, what is going on in CIP? And the excuses that the government is currently trying to give for the state of play right now in the CIP is ridiculous. Absolutely absurd. That the guy who's bringing the court cases to them, their first thing was to say that he's a fraudster. And yet, without going online, that's what I did, and get the filing. And the filing has all of the claims that it's making, and it has, in a large part, a lot of evidence is in this document. And I'm sure there's probably more evidence that's going to be coming out. And even the evidence that's here, Tim, it's damning. It's damning.
But the thing is, it's for a court to decide whether it is evidence that is admissible or not.
Sure, and that's part of the process. Okay,
but
still, when somebody submits something and has these appendixes, and then we can relate it back to what's taking place in St. Lucia, okay, there's a problem. I mean, the CIP program must be understood holistically to maybe have a better appreciation as to what this case is about.
And you framed it to the matter involving MSR, the lawsuit which is filed of a RICO suit in the U.S. federal court. And RICO, by the way, is racketeer, influenced, and corrupt organizations.
Correct.
But the issue that they have is St. Kitts. What does it have to do with St. Lucia specifically?
Okay, let's start from the beginning. There's a pathway to become a citizen in St. Lucia. The pathway that we know the most is you reside 7 years in St. Lucia, and you can apply. You're not guaranteed, but you are qualified to apply to be a citizen after those 7 years. We then have what's called a donation. So a person comes, they donate $100,000 to St. Lucia. The money goes to the CIP. CIP puts the money into the economic fund, which is an account based in St. Lucia, governed by public servants. You can also place a bond, $300,000, like you would buy a bond normally. The money goes into the consolidated account. It helps with the government's expenses for 5 years. At the end of the 5 years, the government pays them back the $300,000, no interest. So the interest on $300,000 for the 5 years, which is normally around 7%, 6.5%, 7%, comes to very close to the $100,000 US dollars. So it's an offset. The other way they can do it is through what's called the real estate program. So a company is authorized to sell real estate. When they sell the real estate, the money goes into what's called an escrow account. And I hear a lot of people using the term escrow account. It's important for us to understand, what does an escrow account mean? So an escrow account means that, let's say I want to do a transaction with you that's going to take a period of time. You don't want to begin the deal until I give you the money. But I want to be assured that when I give you the money, that you do the deal. So what we do is we get an agent, and we write a contract. And the contract basically says, I'm going to deposit X number of dollars into the account. Tim is allowed to draw down on the account when he does these things, and it's up to the agent to determine and confirm that they've done those things. So in this particular case, that it is based on the construction of the project. So initially they're allowed to take out 20% of the money to cover for architectural fees, engineering fees, and mobilization, etc. And then as the project proceeds, only as they achieve construction milestones, foundation, roof, etc., they can draw down on those. So it's up to me to continuously relay with the agent to make sure that he's complying with my wishes. Okay? And anytime I want to know how much money is in the account, I can find out. Anytime that you want to find out how much money is in the account, you can do that. But there's an independent person. So when we speak about an escrow, that is the case. Sadly for us, there was not anyone in St. Lucia who was prepared to do an escrow account. But escrow accounts are done in Dubai, they're doing in New York, they're done in London, they're done all over the world. Okay? So in the case of Galaxy, the escrow account is in China. And it was approved to be in China because most of the expenditures that they were going to have for the hotel were going to come out of China. But the CIP has an eye on what that money is going to be. The next program is called an infrastructural program. And how this government has behaved is they've made some general announcements about it, but they've never provided any levels of details. But here's what we've been able to ascertain so far. You put $100,000, the $100,000 goes to an agent. We're told, I have no confirmation, we're told that that agent is Galaxy. So the $100,000 doesn't go into an escrow account. It goes directly to whoever this agent is. And that agent now is going to agree to pay for construction projects for St. Lucia. Now, we saw a similar program like that in other neighboring countries. And the problem was the money is outside of St. Lucia, the government has no eyes on the money, and nobody is able to ascertain with any level of certainty how much money they've collected and how much money they've spent. So we've heard ratios like they collect $3, they spend $1. We've heard that they collect $4 and spend $1. But you'll never know because we don't know how much money they're collecting.
But why the lack of oversight? And Galaxy came into the picture during your reign as Prime Minister
under the real estate program.
Right.
So as I said to you, when we went to St. Kitts, they had selected Ramada as their management company. I didn't think that Ramada was going to do well. So we said to Galaxy, if they want to come into St. Lucia, they have to get a proper management company. They met with AMR, which is on the same level as a Sandals, major company in the US, to help them with the designs, and that we knew that once the property was open, we knew it would be properly managed, okay, and that would have a really good chance to succeed. Their design people, their experience in what people were looking for, we felt very comfortable with that relationship. The money was put into an escrow account, and they were told they could not do any discounting because we'd heard that they'd been doing discounting on the thing. And so there were processes putting in to make sure that we were monitoring the escrow account as to how much money was going into the escrow account. So I don't know what happened after July 21. But I'm more concerned right now with this infrastructural program. So let's look at the comparison. The donation is $100,000, and the money goes directly into a bank account in St. Lucia, and the officers who sign off on the account are public officers. Okay, the director of finance, the chief economist, the budget director, somebody from the AG's office, and a private sector person. The government can use the money however they want to, because remember they amended it to say whatever project that cabinet wanted. So if cabinet wants to use the money to do roads, if cabinet wants to use the money to do houses, if cabinet wants to use the money to do anything, they can. And they would hopefully follow government procurement guidelines in issuing out those contracts. Full transparency. You're now going to do an infrastructure program where you're going to sell it for the same $100,000. And the money is now going to a person who's not even in St. Lucia. And we have no idea how much money they're collecting. And now the decision as to who they're going to use as the contractor is going to be theirs. But yet it's state money. This is money that was earned off of the sovereignty of St. Lucia's citizenship. Why would you do that? Why? Because the moment you do this project, this program, it's going to destroy the donation program. We also have evidence, and I came and I've made it public, that there are agents in the market selling this $100,000 infrastructure project for as low as $65,000. So we have invoices for $65,000, invoices for $70,000, invoices for $80,000.
So who makes that shortfall?
That's the million-dollar question. Who makes that shortfall? And if you are starting off of a shortfall, then it means your books aren't going to balance, because we would have an expectation it's $100,000. Who knows what the discount is? So this is why what has happened in other countries, one starts speculating how much money are they collecting and how much money they're spending. So is it for every $3 they earn, they're going to spend $1? So where does the $2 go? And why should they be getting the $2? And if we have a system in which we now can account for 100% of our money, why wouldn't you do that? So this is what I'm saying. You sit here and you go, why? And then you have to ask the next question. Who's benefiting? So between this case, the first red flag was a gentleman, I think he was Iranian, got a St. Kitts passport. And he was given a diplomatic passport from St. Kitts. And he flew to Canada, and he was arrested. Okay? Very quickly afterwards, Canada terminated the visa-free access for all of the OACS countries, if you remember. And it's only recently that they've reintroduced what's called an ETA system. You can apply online. But if you want to apply for a Canadian visa online, you must have had a US visa in the last 10 years. So what was the consequence of all of this? And it's not even an action that took place in St. Lucia. It's an action that took place in St. Kitts. St. Lucia was even part of the CIP program when this happened. St. Lucians lost. St. Lucians had visa-free access. All of a sudden, they didn't.
Yeah, but what would have contributed as well would be St. Lucians making false representation, and among other OECS nationals when they visited Canada, seeking the permission to reside there, seeking residency.
So,
but remember that particular era.
Yes, and I'm very convinced that the numbers that was taking place, that was just a good, statement to make. But I can tell you that I believe, right, and many other people believe that Canada was concerned about what was happening with CIP. Now, Canada had a very robust CIP program before, and they stopped it. So they're very familiar with how the CIP programs worked. So I want to say to you that was the first red flag that happened. We now have an audit that was done by the British government last year on Dominica and St. Kitts, and revealed that Dominica had sold over 34,000 passports, citizenship programs, when their reports had said it was something like 12,000. In the case of St. Kitts, they had sold close to 48,000 over the period of time. In the case of Dominica, there were also things that came up in the audit that were very concerning. The result of that was that the British government pulled their visa-free access for Dominicans to go into the United Kingdom, and shortly afterwards, Ireland did the same thing. So that was the first time we saw it where it wasn't generally to a region, but it was targeted specifically to a country. We then saw that the EU came up and said, we're very concerned. We're so concerned that we're going to go to our parliament and seek approval from the parliament that the executive of the EU can pull or terminate the visa fee, the Schengen visa, to any country that has a CIP program. So in June, that's what the parliament is voting on. They're not voting on any region in the world. They're voting on to give the authority to the executive to immediately pull the Schengen visa from any country that has a CIP program. Next thing that comes up is this case is filed. And this is making damning allegations of discounting, and it's also indicating that they've gotten access to money accounts. And I'll explain that happened. But at the same time that this has happened, 3 Chinese persons, nationals, were arrested, 1 in the UK, 2 in the US. They were arrested for money laundering and for was malware. So doing spy software programs and trying to extort people. All 3 of them had passports from St. Kitts. And in the case of one of them, that they had used fraudulent documentation to get that citizenship. So it begs the question, right? Is due diligence being done properly? And there are 2 sets of people.
Whether it's in St. Lucia, whether it's in Dominica, Grenada, or St. Kitts Nevis, right? You're concerned as far as all the islands are concerned.
Well, everybody would have to be concerned as to how this happened. Now, let's understand that there's 2 sides to this coin. The countries that are giving us visa-free are saying, we trust you.
Yeah.
The integrity of your state is sufficient that you can come into my country, and I'm allowing you to come in without me doing any major background checks on you. Okay? So those countries now are having to say, wait a second, we have an individual who should have never gotten a passport in the first place and then was made a diplomat. So by making the person a diplomat was to say that when they come into their country, you can't even arrest them. They're protected. All right? We have persons that had false documentation and have come in to try to extort money from their citizens. There are all kinds of statements coming out and allegations about the standard of the due diligence. So from a security perspective of the Europeans, of the British, of the Canadians, of the Americans, and it ought to be of other CARICOM countries, they have to be going, whoa, I have no problems in you doing this program, I have my concerns, but you need to do this thing right, because I am not going to extend this courtesy to you if I am no longer comfortable that this is safe. Because these aren't really St. Lucians. These are people who have bought their way into becoming a St. Lucian citizen or a Kittian citizen. Look, St. Lucian's first impact on this, I remember when people were complaining one point as to how many Chinese were here working.
Yeah.
That was about, 20 years ago? Where were all they coming from? They were buying their citizenship in Dominica, and because they were from a Dominican citizen, they could come here and work. So when the government looked into it, there was nothing they could do to prevent those Chinese persons from being here. So we had a first taste of it. But this is also taking place in a world in which national security is becoming of a higher priority.
And we all know that in the case of our countries, especially in the sub-region, we tend to be very lax and carefree when it comes to issues of that nature. What do you think gave us the impression that we've been able to do the due diligence because we are sufficiently equipped, and also because we are sufficiently concerned and adept at things of that nature?
So I can tell you, when I got into government, I was a bit taken back that you do 3 sets of due diligence. So there's a thing called WorldSpan. It's a computer system. I can put your name in, I can put your passport, etc., and it'll tell me some stuff about you. But not everybody's captured in that. The second due diligence is what we call a third-party due diligence. So if you say that you were living in Moscow, there's a company I would use in Moscow. The company in Moscow would actually go to where you work, where you live, and confirm physically that the information that you've given to me is correct. And then the last one is through Impacts and RSS, which are based in Barbados and Trinidad. Those entities are very important because they're the ones who have the relationship with the FBI, with M1, with Interpol, so they have access to all of the international databases. So the file, if it passes the first due diligence test, if it passes the second due diligence test, then you send it off to RSS and to Impacts. When we first send the files to them, there was no relationship between Impacts and RSS. So some of the files were coming back with approved from RSS, but not approved from Impacts. And I remember going down to Barbados, the Americans, the Canadians, the British were in the room with us, so it's not like trying to interfere with any of the process, but just looking at the structure. it took us over a year and a half to get that sorted out. There was also an agreement that there had to be some monies at some point going to those entities, because this was going to be a lot of work. Now, I knew that other countries were not following this process, because that process was taking in excess of 9 months. And we were saying to them, it cannot take 9 months. We've got to streamline this down. And I think that we were successful by the end of the day, bringing that down to about 3 to 4 months in most cases. Some cases that were a bit more difficult, duplicate names or all kinds of incidents that happen, it takes a bit longer. But I think that people were patient. But certainly 9 to 10 months, people aren't willing to wait that long, plus whatever time that you take on your side to do the processing. So I'm proud of the fact that during my administration that we were very successful, but we had two very good people heading that up. The chairman of our CIP, Ryan DeVoe, was the head of the International Bank for Banking Solution, which got privatized and is now owned by Proven. Why? Because Ryan had the experience of the due diligence. Because of the banking, correspondent banks required you to know where your customer was. So as an international banker, the due diligence is even more difficult, and you're dealing with an international level. And then Nestor Alfred, who came from the banking industry, particularly dealing with compliance, making sure you know your customer, making sure the files are done correctly. So these were two gentlemen that actually brought processes to the game. Today, we have Claude Emmanuel as the CEO. What's his experience? In 2016, when I came into government, he was the manager of Radio Solution. My understanding is he's also the campaign manager for Philip Pierre. That's who the CEO is. Really? And then of all the places the Prime Minister wants to facilitate, allow his daughter to working, is in CIP. You then have Galaxy, and Galaxy has Thaddeus Antoine as their lawyer. And Thaddeus Antoine is a very close friend to the minister. The minister has...
But this is a small society. Mm-hmm. And everybody is, in some cases, that's your half-brother or half-sister or first cousin, etc. Don't you think those are things that are likely to happen? Maybe not deliberately, but they're likely to happen. The Prime Minister's wife ought to work somewhere in St. Lucia. CIP, okay, but it could be at a tourist board, could be at Invest St. Lucia, it could be in the private sector.
So I would
but
say,
she has to work somewhere.
Okay, so I would just say to you that if in fact that is the case, and these kinds of allegations come up, then there needs to be a greater amount of transparency and a seriousness played. Because you would clearly understand people are going to look at it and say, boy, this is a conflict of interest. Right? So when the Prime Minister stands on the podium and says, this is a fraud, this is, I've not been served, and refuses to get take up the gentleman on his offer to go in and ascertain for himself whether the information is correct or not. Is he protecting those persons? That is the weight that he has to carry when you allow those kinds of individuals with conflicts to be in those positions. So I get it's a small society, but people need to declare their hand, and when this kind of stuff happens, they ought to separate. So in my opinion, right now, this is a very urgent matter, and let's understand what's at stake. For St. Lucians, there's two very important things that are at stake. One is there's 140 countries that we have visa-free access to. And very importantly, Europe, including Martinique and Guadeloupe, England, Canada, and if we think it's difficult to get a US visa now, if in fact that we're red flagged, it'll become virtually impossible. So St. Lucians' ability to be mobile, to access the world, and to benefit from a good reputation is at cost and at risk. And our reputation in general. So I remember very unfortunately when I was working at Air Jamaica, and the Air Jamaica flights used to arrive in the States, they were always greeted by customs with the dogs because Jamaica had a reputation of drugs. Okay? So don't believe for a minute that it stops just at the visa free. Even when you get a visa, you're going to be under serious scrutiny. The second one is very important, the de-risking. So this gentleman, who's an American citizen, when he was sued, and the lawyer who sued him, I think it was November of 2023, was sued by Peter Foster, right? He then turned around and went to the U.S. courts and applied for subpoenas and was able to get information from the corresponding banks. So Bank of America, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan, Chase Morgan. What do you think their reaction to this is going to be? You don't think they're going to be calling up the banks here and say, hey, what's going on? And you all need to double down? How does that impact solutions? And why are we bringing it up as an issue? It's going to make it even more difficult for solutions to be able to open up an account. And there's a possibility of the work that was done to lose our correspondent banks. So the correspondent banks are the ones that allow our credit cards to work, allow us to make payments around the world. If we lose that, then we become a cash society. So small businesses here who are doing business with tourists will not be able to have a credit card. If you want to go and book an airline ticket, okay, online, you wouldn't be able to do it because you're not going to have a credit card. That is what is at risk. This is not about the opposition wanting to just lay blame on this government, but the fact is that there are a lot of red flags being raised. If they are genuine in their approach, they would fix these things. Nobody wants to see the CIP program going. Can you justify, or anybody else in St. Lucia, explain to me, or even to themselves, why the government was refusing to sign the MOA? You would see, I would rush to do it. Any government that really cared about its citizens and understood the risk that we have of losing our visa-free access, of possibly destroying our banking system and having to go to a cash system, the impact that that's going to have on our economy, would have rushed to sign this deal.
But even though you have some various arrangements that are pending with regard to contracts with certain individuals that are
we've all been there.
Signed?
This is an act of God. I go to you and I say, hey Tim, I have a problem. The EU is threatening to take away our visa-free regime, which means that it's going to devalue the same citizenship that we're trying to sell. So here's the deal. I have to sign this agreement. Whatever you're able to sell before June, I will process for you. But after June, I can't process it because the price is going to go up. This is not complicated.
So you think that the government should sign the agreement before or by June the 30th?
It better. It better. And I think that this thing has gone so upside down that at this point, I think with the allegations that have come out, in this report, okay, and some of the evidence that they've presented, particularly an audio transcript from Mr. Emmanuel, and the things that he said in it, personally, I think that he should be suspended temporarily until this matter is investigated. I think that the minister, who has a checkered background himself, with the Jufali matter, the Range Rover matter, and several other incidences, that he should be replaced. I think another person should be allowed to oversee the CIP until an independent investigation is done. And I think that that independent investigation should be done by the central bank. Because that is whose reputation is in fact who you're affecting. Because this has now become bigger. Because now you've brought Bank of America. You've brought these major Wells Fargo. You've brought these major banks to the table. And the bank itself will be affected, and so will the OECS region. This is a very serious situation, and it needs decisive and clear action, and ones that show that this government is hiding nothing. But to say that we stand by our man, then if he's wrong, who loses? Him or us?
What does that take there for those islands that have CVI or CPI programs, the likes of St. Kitts, Grenada, Dominica, etc.?
I believe that with this report coming out, and with the 3 Chinese that were caught with passports from St. Kitts and the crimes that they've committed, I think that with the pending vote that's going to take place in June at the EU, and I know that the prime ministers are meeting to discuss this now, I think they need to move all of the CIP programs into the OECS. I think all of the CIP units should be amalgamated and put into the OECS. I think that the money should be paid into the OECS. I think that the monies that are earned through CIP should go into the development bank for the OECS, overseen by the central bank and some of the other development agencies within the region, and that there's full transparency. And I think they need to do that as a matter of urgency, because I think that we have run out of time. If you put it in the OECS, out of the hands of any of the individual countries, you're going to have a common standard. If in fact those countries see the money is going to go into an institution like a development bank for the OECS that can be accessed to the OECS or to co-sponsor programs with the World Bank and CDB and other agencies, I believe that we have a very good chance that we can hold on to this thing, because they would say, okay, this makes a lot of sense. But I think any attempt to maintain the program as it is on a trust basis, I'm sorry. I believe that our partners have lost all trust in us, and I'm fearing the worst from 2 sides. One, I think that we're going to see a reduction or complete elimination of our visa-free access. And as I said to you, I think there's going to be a fallout with the correspondent banks.
What gives you the impression that any of the governments will decide to do that when they do not want to cede sovereignty? And we'll put the telephone number on screen right now so that you can call with your questions and comments for my guest, Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Alan Chastanet.
You hit the nail on the head. And you and I have had this discussion, right? Regional unity can only take place when people understand the cost-benefit of sovereignty. There's no point on holding on to sovereignty, in this case, to your CIP programs, right? If it's going to have a negative repercussion. One, there's going to be a serious backlash on the correspondent banks from a de-risking perspective, and our citizens are going to lose visas. And who's to know what CARICOM's response is going to be? Because CARICOM allows St. Lucians and all of these other OECS countries to come into their country visa-free.
Good evening to you, NewsMaker Live, you're on the air.
Yeah, Tim, how you doing, man?
Hi, good evening to you, caller.
Yeah, I'd like to hear your leader of the opposition is crying now. The Labour Party is doing very, very well, and they're crying. Guy said to the people.
Caller, do you have, with regard to the discussion, let's elevate the discussion. With regard to the CIP and the issue that we've been raising there, what particular comment or question do you have for the guest?
Yeah, I heard he mentioned about the Antoine as a lawyer, but his wife is a lawyer and he gave her business too. So how do you expect things going to run?
Is my wife have a relationship with Ernest Hilaire? Maybe you can say it on air. Maybe you know something I don't know.
You're all doing the same thing.
Okay, thank you so much, caller. Let's try and elevate the discussion. Good evening to you. This is NewsMaker Live, you're on the air.
Good evening, Tim. How are you doing?
Hi, good evening to you, caller. Can you just speak up a bit?
Can you hear me better, Tim?
Yes, go ahead. Do you have a question or comment for my guest? Go ahead, please.
Question for the next Prime Minister of St. Lucia. Mr. Prime Minister Alan Chastanet, question for you, sir. Based on this whole CIP scandal, what are the consequences of St. Lucians losing their visa-free access to, say, the countries like such as the UK, Martinique, particularly when we're hearing of instances where there is no boats no longer going to Martinique, and some St. Lucians depend on going to Martinique for medical attention or for employment purposes. Based on this Labour Party's government refusal to sign the MIA, which is necessary, which they have no choice, but they're refusing to sign. What are the consequences? Because as you know, the UK will be will be putting a vote to the table sometime end of June.
The EU.
What are the consequences of St. Lucia losing its visa-free access to the UK, to Martinique, etc.?
Okay, thank you so much, caller.
So the UK has already shown that after their audit of Dominica, they pulled the visa-free access, and the Irish followed in suit. The vote that's going to the EU in June is to give the authority to the executive that any CIP country, that the executive has the authority to withdraw, cancel, suspend the Schengen visa. So it's something that can happen very quickly and would not have to go back to the vote of the Parliament. I personally believe, from what I've been hearing, that that motion is going to pass. And this is why the deadline date of June was established, because immediately after that is passed, the EU is going to make a decision. Now the question is, the countries that have signed the MOA, are they going to leave them alone and only target the countries that have not signed the MOA? Or are they going to say that we want all of the OECS to sign this agreement that are in the CIP programs, and in the absence of all, we're going to penalize all?
Good evening, NewsMaker Live. Okay, well, that was that call. But clearly, Dr. Ralph Gonzalez, we'll turn our attention to him in just a moment. Hello? Okay, we lost that call, but continue to call us once again. The telephone number is on screen for my guest, Mr. Alan Chastanet, who is the leader of the opposition. Hello, good evening.
Good evening, Tim.
Hi, good evening to you, caller. Can you speak up, please?
Good. Just a sec. Let me just get away from the TV.
Because I can't hear you too clearly.
Okay, good evening. Can you hear me now?
I could barely hear you, but go ahead, caller.
I can hear you very well.
Okay,
Yeah,
so I'm just saying, I was saying that you cannot show people what they don't want to see. And the places some people are with their political allegiance, that's just going to blind them, and sadly to say, we're going to be the ones paying for it. I'm listening to what the Prime Minister, the leader of the opposition is saying, and it just reminds me of because I watch documentaries and what have you on like the African countries and how their leaders allow other companies to come in and just loot their natural resources. And of course, for a cut, then you see how the leaders themselves live lavish lives and everything. And I'm saying that is what is going on there. Because, like he says, you can see it doesn't make sense. The agreements that are being put in place, it just doesn't make sense. Something is missing, because the benefit to the country, which is what it should be when something is put, a policy is put in place, you're not seeing it. And obviously, what we're missing is that who is benefiting. But with the African countries, you could tell that it was the leaders who were benefiting. So that's what I'm seeing.
And I think,
okay, caller, thank you.
Yeah, I think he's very, very right. I mean, as I said, you look at the amount of money, because the state is losing access to cash. And more importantly, the checks and balances that have been put in place, the Procurement Acts, the Ministry of Finance, etc., all of those entities are being bypassed. So in the case of the CIP, instead of the $100,000 going into an account controlled by civil servants, even though it's not in a consolidated account, you know where the money is. And you would hope that the government would follow those procurement guidelines.
Good evening, NewsMaker Live, you're on the air.
Yeah,
Good evening to you, caller.
Tim.
Yes, good evening. All right.
All right. Something I want to ask Chastanet. Yeah. Good night.
Caller, can you go ahead, please, with your contribution?
Huh?
Can you go ahead, please?
Yeah. I want to ask Chastanet a question, right? It go for you too. Why?
Okay, caller. Thank you so much. Obviously, the caller is listening to whatever device is using to monitor the program, and therefore that is serving as a great distraction. But Dr. Ralph Gonzalez, the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, a man of foresight, based on everything that is happening right now?
Yes, but I mean, the Prime Minister and I had a conversation about this, right? Because I went to him when we made the decision that we were going to continue the CIP, because remember the CIP was started under the previous administration.
Yeah.
I think that he was hoping that we would probably cancel it. But as I said to the Prime Minister Gonzalez, we're in it. Because they're selling citizenship. Those persons are becoming citizens of the other OECS countries. How are you going to discriminate against them? And in fact, CARICOM lawyers did a report and said we cannot discriminate against them. So he said, well, if they're not born there, well, you know what? They have a lot of St. Lucians who were not born in St. Lucia. I'm one of them. So you're going to discriminate against me because I was born in Martinique? That doesn't work.
Let's get on the call. Good evening, NewsMaker Live, you're on the air.
Good evening, my boss.
Good evening to you, caller.
Good evening, my boss. Mr. Good night, my G. I like Mr. Chastanet. Mr. Chastanet is the best Prime Minister since I recommend the Prime Minister to come my Prime Minister in the next future.
Thank you very much, my brother.
You know what I'm saying?
Okay, caller. Thank you so much. Dr. Rav Gonzalez. Okay, we have another call coming in. Good evening, NewsMaker Live, you're on the air.
Yes, good evening.
Hi, good evening to you, caller.
Good evening, leader of the opposition.
Good evening.
Yes. What I want to ask is that the last CIP monies, where they went to? And is the leader of the opposition in any, does he have any right to tell us where or how to put our money, since he have no kind of, he have no in terms of capabilities and transparency and so on. He shouldn't be talking to us at all. All
right, sir. All right, caller. Thank you so much.
So under our administration, before the economic fund was put together, all the monies went into the consolidated account. And in order to draw money out from the consolidated account, they have to be identified in the budget. So things like the refurbishing of OKEU, refurbishing of schools, fixing up of roads, monies were used in all kinds of the sporting programs, the marketing of St. Lucia Tourism Authority. Monies were spread out and they were all outlined as to how much money that was being allocated. The monies were sent over by the Ministry of Finance to those relevant ministries or statutory authorities through a transfer. So there was full accountability for the money. We then put the money now into an economic fund, which was supposed to be a sovereign fund. And we put strict guidelines that the monies could only be used either to pay debt or for capital investment projects. And if you remember, when this government came in, they amended it to say any project approved by the cabinet. I didn't agree with that. I think that takes away the ring fencing of that money. We've not been given any accounts as to how that money has been spent.
For that point, we have a call. Good evening. Thanks for holding on. NewsMaker Live, you're on the air.
Good evening, Tim.
Good evening to you, caller.
Good evening, John.
Good evening.
Okay. I just need to ask a question.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I heard your contribution. I heard what you were saying. I'm very impressed with some of your records. But I need to ask you, what are you going to put in place to ensure that this very thing will happen under your administration? Because I've noticed what happens in St. Lucia is that anytime we get the new government interested into office, they abandon everything that the former government has done. And I'm somebody that is totally against it. If a project has started that is benefiting the country, and when another one comes in, they abandon it. And both your party and the present government are guilty of it. So I heard you all, it's all nice. I just want to know what mechanisms are you going to put in place, because it would seem to me that the individual parliamentarians and the individual ministers are empowered with whatever they like, without the Prime Minister himself having an authority. So what mechanisms do you intend to put in place to prevent this from happening?
Thank you so much, caller.
I think it's a great question. I keep talking about strengthening our institutions, strengthening our accounting systems. I mean, so we have come a long way in strengthening our financial act. I certainly would encourage and make sure that monies are going through the government system. I think this idea of creating third parties and bypassing the government system is wrong, especially when it's state funds.
You have a call. Good evening, NewsMaker Live, you're on the air.
evening, Tim.
Hi, good evening to you, caller.
And good evening to your guests.
Good evening, sir.
Tim, this is not the first time that the leader of the opposition is using scaremongering in that visa vibe. This has happened before, where he has said that the St. Lucian's ability to get visas, to go to the US, to go to Europe, so on, is being jeopardized. He has said that before. The Prime Minister and the government has made it clear the reasons why and haven't signed the agreement. And they are going to sign the agreement, but they are mitigating circumstances that they are in negotiations with a number of CIP recipients, and they are waiting that the final stay on this negotiation before they sign. They made that clear to the people of St. Lucia. So my brother, stop this scaremongering and do your job properly, and stop propagating lies on national television. Thank you.
Thank you so much for calling.
I feel very sorry for the gentleman if he actually believes the government. No details have been provided to us when they're going to sign the MOA. They said they weren't going to sign the MOA. Then all of a sudden now they're saying that they're contemplating signing, or they're committed to signing the MOA, but they can't give us a date. Right? The June deadline is coming. I would say to you that this case that's been filed, you cannot ignore it. To say, oh, this is a one-off, I've not been subpoenaed. I don't know if you remember. I don't want to mention names. There was a minister of government in Barbados who an insurance firm accused of bribing. Yes? Mm-hmm. And he was never charged in Barbados. But when he received the money, he transferred the money to the United States of America. Correct? The United States found out about the bribery charge or allegation, put him in court, found him guilty, and he went to jail.
I think for about 2 years.
Okay? He went to jail. So this idea that you're saying, well, I've not been summoned, right? Do we know that it's been filed? Look at it. It's an official document in the court system of the United States of America. And it's making some damning allegations that's threatening the national security of America. And this is coming at the same time when 3 Chinese people who got passports from St. Kitts have been now charged with serious crimes. You don't think America is going to be taking this thing seriously? And when you have an officer, because he's not just representing himself, he's an officer of the government of St. Lucia, that's Mr. Emmanuel, and that they say that they have evidence, taped evidence, of him saying that the minister, I mean, what you want me to read the wording?
No. Let's take a call. Good evening to you. This is NewsMaker Live. You're on the air.
Hi, good evening. Good evening. How are you doing, sir?
Good evening to you, caller.
Good evening, Mr. Chastanet.
Good evening, sir.
From what I've been hearing from you, have the Canadians, Americans made any objections to what is happening with that gentleman, Felipe Martinez? Have the Americans come out and say that the St. Lucia CIP is bad? The Canadians have come out and it's only you and Mr. Martinez alone I hear talking about the CIP program. I'm not hearing the Americans saying nothing about the CIP program. I'm not hearing the Canadians through any communication anything about the CIP program. It's you and Mr. Martinez alone. I'm not hearing anything else. So I'm wondering if there's any collusion between you two.
So can I ask you a question, sir?
Go ahead.
Have you gone online and have you gotten a copy of the case and have you read it?
I have read all the documentation pertaining to that matter. I've read it already.
So you've read the case. The charges.
I've read the case file that Mr. Robin said to you.
And you've seen you've seen the evidence, and that this has been filed in a U.S. court.
It can be filed in a Canadian court, Mr. Shasti. That's not the point. The point is...
it is the point. So
the point is the United States have nothing. So United States as the government.
So Canada. I'm just answering your question. The Canadian government has already spoken.
Why do you say, Mr. Shasti?
Because only you have to apply online to get a visa.
No, I'm asking you. You said the Canadian government spoken. What did they say?
I told you they have already spoken. They've changed the visa regime that you have to apply online, and that a St. Lucian must have had a U.S. visa for 10 years, in the last 10 years, in order to be able to apply online. Otherwise, you have to go and get your visa. So we've already lost our visa-free regime into Canada. So Canada is already protecting itself. America is protecting itself. The question right now is the visa-free access that we have to the UK, the visa-free access that we have to Europe. Now, I know that the Prime Minister has attempted to confuse us as to what the relationship between Martinique, St. Lucia, and Europe are. So I don't know whether St. Lucia is part of Europe, Martinique is part of Europe. I know that Martinique is part of, wait a second, Martinique is part of Europe. So if the Europeans make a decision for national security reasons that they're going to terminate the visa, and have the Europeans said that they possibly will? Have the Europeans said that they're contemplating removing the visa-free regime from the OECD? I'm just asking a question.
That is what you keep saying.
No, but I'm asking you a question. Have you not heard? Have you not? Have you?
That one is an answer because
no.
Okay, thank you so much, Paula.
The Europeans have said it. The Europeans said, sign this agreement. If you don't sign an agreement by June, we're amending the law to give ourselves the authority to suspend it.
We have another call?
Wait a second. And you also have the situation in Dominica, right, where the British have already removed it. So we know the threat is real. Stop denying. We cannot live in denial. This is not about Alan Chastanet and the politics. The purpose of a leader of the opposition is not to oppose. It is to provide an opposing view. I've listened to the government. I've given the government, like everybody else, an opportunity to explain itself. The Prime Minister said he went to Europe. Has he given us a real explanation as to what the meeting was about? Are we any wiser why he would have gone to that meeting? What he was discussing at that meeting? What's the outcome of that meeting?
Good evening. NewsMaker Live, you're on the air.
Yes, good evening, team.
Good evening to you, caller.
Good evening. Yes, good evening, team, and good evening, Mr. Chastanet.
Good evening to you, ma'am.
Okay. During Mr. Chastanet as Prime Minister, the CIP money never came out and told us how much money he collected.
That's not true.
What he did with the money.
That's not true. That's not true.
And then
hold on, caller. If he's saying that's not true, if he's saying that's not true, caller, just hold on.
That's not true. And again, there are people who want to continue to repeat that story. That's not true. The money was going into the money was
hold on. If you're saying he did not disclose, he's not telling you, he's not giving an answer.
The money went into the consolidated account. In the back of the page, the capital projects, all of the projects that were funded by CIP were there for 3 years. Every single cent. So please don't say that. And we went through a long explanation repeatedly, and I brought the documents to the house. So you cannot say you cannot say that as a case. And before we left, wait a second, ma'am. I listened to you.
Told us how many passports that you sold.
But there's a report every year.
Told us because
every year.
The SLP in opposition at that time.
Yes.
The SLP begged you to find out how much money you collected. You never came out and told us how much money you collected.
No, ma'am. I'm so sorry.
So I'm so sorry. I'm trying to.
Okay, now caller, hold on. Let me play referee there. So if that happened during his reign, you're not concerned what is happening right now at all?
No, but wait a second. I want to make it
very well right now.
I want to make
Mr. Chastanet just do not
caller, hold on. Caller, we're discussing two issues. All right, thank you so much. We're not into the quarreling, caller. Okay, we're not into the quarreling.
It's amazing the insistence, right? And Ernest Hilaire did the same thing, where he stood in the House and repeatedly said, "We're not giving him the information." And I remember going to the House and bringing all the documents, okay, and showing him exactly what the projects that were being funded and what were being done. Further proof. When was the last time an audit report was done for CIP? Okay? They're supposed to be every year. Every year we provided a report that explains how many passports were issued and what countries that they came from. Why would I not want to expose that information? That's easy information to be able to expose. What is it you think that we're hiding? In this particular instance, they have not provided any details as to how much money they've gotten. They have not told us how the money has been spent. But my bigger issue right now is what they're proposing to do with this infrastructure program. You have announced a new program. You have not provided sufficient details in my mind. Who is the agent? Is it true that the agent is getting the money? Who's going to be doing the accounting of it? Is it going? Where is the money going? Who's determining which projects? How much are the projects going to cost?
We'll take a final call. Good evening, NewsMaker Live, you're on the air.
Hey, good evening, Tim.
Good evening to you, caller.
And good evening to Mr. Chastanet.
Good evening, sir.
Tim, have you ever heard of a man called Jesus Christ?
Mm-hmm. All of us have. We have, caller.
Okay. Now, I know it may sound strange me asking that question. Did you realize he came to save people and they still nailed him to a tree? I'm saying this to bring out a point. And Mr. Chastanet, if you could indulge me here for a quick second. Those allegations that was made in a press conference today, was it not today, yesterday, from Mr. Joseph about the GPH.
Yeah.
How credible is that information?
Very credible.
If that is credible, and now we know for a fact that a lawsuit was filed in the U.S. and not just in the U.S. but in the U.S. federal court system under the RICO Act, and it have implicated our CIP CEO. Is that true?
Yes, it is.
So St. Lucia is dealing with two major, potentially international scandals at the same time. One, our pots were sold.
Least, caller, least.
It was leased. Okay. Thank you for the correction, Tim. It was leased for 30 years or 40 years?
30 years with a 10-year extension.
And if what Mr. Joseph stated yesterday in that press conference with those figures, which I have not heard a denial, Tim, have you heard the denial of what the so-called evidence
no, I haven't
presented?
I haven't, caller.
Okay, so we're still waiting for that. And if that is accurate, you mean to tell me we basically gave these people our pots for nothing? As a matter of fact, we paid them to take our pots from us.
Correct.
And not only that, now it is possible that we can lose visa. We can lose access to the European countries and potentially have sanctions placed against us for in traveling to the U.S. and Canada, additional sanctions, because we potentially have sold our passports to people that maybe people do not know who really these people are. We've made bubble in our passports. We've become a laughing stock. I have my friends call me from...
Caller, we have no evidence of what you're making reference to, a bubble. You could only have some kind of investigation, some kind of probe and determine that. But in the meantime, we know of no such bubble, because if there is any bubble, then those who committed it, we have to hold them to account, make them account for it.
Okay, now let me clarify this in case that no liability comes to you. I am not aware of any bubble, but there is the appearance of bubble. So I just want to be very clear that we are actually dealing with a lot as St. Lucians. And yet still people are calling, not concerned about what is happening in the country with those two major issues, but to let you know about when you were Prime Minister. Sir, if I check, it's almost 3 years you've not been the Prime Minister. True or false?
Correct.
So those issues that are confronting us here have nothing to do with you. These are the doings of the current government. So, Tim, I would highly encourage you to, when people call, I hope that is what is affecting St. Lucia today, because today we have GPH and we have the potential CIP issue that might become an embarrassment to this country. Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chastanet.
All right, thank you so much, sir. Final comments from you, Mr. Chastanet.
I just want to say very quickly in response to one of the persons that when I made those statements, I made them in Parliament, and they're part of the Hansard. And in 3 years, the government has never come back to show that the information that we provided as to how the CIP monies were being spent refuted that. Any allegations of bubble have no charges have been laid against any of my ministers. despite all the allegations, whether it was the Rodney Bay Road, whether it was St. Jude's, whatever it was, nothing. So I want to end tonight by saying that, Tim, a very important concept that we have in St. Lucia is called democracy. And a lot of persons have heard the word, but struggle to define what democracy really is. And maybe by saying that the opposite to democracy is a dictatorship. And what a dictatorship is known for is taking away people's individual rights. One person has the authority to tell you whether you can own land. They can take your land, they can take your money, they can take over your business, they can prohibit you from moving your home. There's no recourse of action. So clearly when you describe it that way, I think every single St. Lucian prefers to live in a democracy. But for a democracy to work, it means that the checks and balances that have been enshrined in our Constitution must be upheld. The job of a leader of the opposition to provide an opposing view must be taken seriously and cannot be seen in the context of just politics. We must defend an independent judiciary. When we have a judge who recuses himself from a case, claiming that there was political interference, and is transferred to another territory, and almost 1 year later, that judge has not been replaced here in St. Lucia. No explanation has been offered to us as to why he was transferred, whether in fact his allegations of political interference were true. We must concern ourselves. If we are now today living in a country in which people are concerned about victimization, I heard some of your callers call and speak about the silence in our country and attribute that silence to the fear of victimization. Just the sole fact that we are fearful of victimization tells us that our democracy is being undermined, that the checks and balances are not working. We cannot live in fear in a democratic country. We must understand that the government that's in power, that power comes from the will of the people. And the will of the people is written in a document called the Constitution of St. Lucia. That's what empowers them. And when government or any officer does things to infringe those fundamental rights, we need to stand up. When we say that we want freedom, when we say that we want our patrimony to be protected, these are all constitutional rights. The government has an obligation to maintain the integrity of the state. It has an obligation to make sure that it's spending the money in the best purpose for the benefit of the most number of people in this country. And it has a responsibility to be transparent in that action. And I put it to all of us that this government is failing. This government has clearly betrayed the trust of the state. CIP. Why would you take away $100,000 that was going into an account in St. Lucia under the control of the government of St. Lucia to put it $100,000 into a third party? We don't know where the money is going, and tell us that that is better for us. GPH. That you would allow $400 million to be transferred to a third party who never went out to bid, can't tell us how we're going to benefit from it. And that this is a significant amount of money for a country that's in poverty. The NLA, to take $80 million from the government, put it into the national lotteries, and allow the national lotteries to decide who they're going to spend the money with and what projects they're going to do. The halls of justice, that we would do a bolt arrangement that we normally would do with the NIC and with NIPRO, and give it to a third party outside of St. Lucia. And at an extraordinary cost that cannot be justified. And up to now, the government cannot provide us with any details. St. Jude's Hospital, that you now want to go and spend $265 million. As if it's not bad enough that 3 years has gone by and you've made zero progress on that project. And the list goes on of a multitude of other decisions that this government is making that we're left asking why. And not being able to understand why, we are forced to ask ourselves, who's benefiting? Because if we can't see directly that the people of this country are benefiting, then something is wrong. It can't be right. What is at stake is not just our visas, visa-free access. What is not at stake is not only our correspondent banks so we can have credit cards and we can interact with, globally, financially with the world. What really is at stake is our democracy. Our democracy is in serious threat. And if we don't enforce the checks and balances in our democracy, we are then going to have an autocracy. The same thing that every single solution, when you ask them, do they want this? No. But it can't be more important for other people than for ourselves. So for the young people, your future is being sold out in front of you. For the older generation, what you wanted to leave your children is in jeopardy. For the persons who are in the middle, your future, the ability for you to maintain your family is in jeopardy. You cannot feel fair in questioning things the government is doing on your behalf. You cannot feel fair in holding the government accountable for what they're supposed to do. And it's time that we stand up for our freedoms in this country. What is taking place in Vieux Fort, where an ordinary police officer can walk into your house without a warrant, still today, is unacceptable in a democracy. St. Lucia, as a leader of the opposition, I'm going to continue to bring these facts to the table. But as the political leader of the United Workers' Party, I'm asking again that this government do the right thing. Sign the MOA. I think that the CEO has to be suspended. I believe the minister must be removed, even if it's temporarily, and replaced with somebody else, and to allow an outside agency to do an audit to satisfy all of us. Because the government has failed in its responsibility to provide us with that information, has failed in giving us the comfort, has failed in being accountable of its stewardship of this country. And I am worried. I believe we're in serious trouble. When I see a budget that the economy grew by 2.2%, but debt has grown by 8.8%. So the debt is growing 4 times faster than what the economy is growing. We are in serious trouble, and we need to raise our voices. We need to stand up for what we have as our country. Otherwise, it's not worth anything. But I'm here with you. My party is here with you. And I think it's time for us to make a change and to hold this government accountable for what it owes us.
Thank you so much, Mr. Leader of the Opposition, for being my guest during this evening's NewsMaker Live. And to you, thank you so much for watching and listening to the broadcast and participating via your calls. If it's Wednesday, it's NewsMaker Live. Time now for the clip that peaked.
Put it, the man. Put it. Yes, sir, you play too. Put it, yes, sir. Come, the man. Come now, stop irritating me, man. You have to play, yes, sir. Can you not play, yes, sir? So put it, yes, sir, the man, make me win. Say, man, shut up, the man. Come the spoil, man. He can't help you, man. Pass.
Once again, thank you so much for watching the broadcast. It's a very enjoyable evening. My name is Timothy Poleon, saying good night and see you next time.
I, Philip Joseph here, I would like to be judged as being the Prime Minister, not being judged as being part of a government.
Came into government that we had a manifesto and a vision and mission that had been approved by my party, by the highest body.
Basel 11 has not been in existence. 50 was...
Giant getting bazooka. Spraying big gun to knock out mosquitoes.
I have never had a joint account with anybody in my life. Not my ex-wife, not my children, nobody. And I will refer that to the Privileges Committee.
What about the culture of people getting into office and not being effective in taking...
What people become Prime Minister of St. Lucia have been the most ready.
Let's do it this Wednesday, because if it's Wednesday, it's NewsMaker Live.